Hello and welcome, fellow awesomologists, to Awesomology. I'm Sue.
And I'm Ben, and in this episode, we're bringing you a bonus interview that was too good not to share.
Yes, this one's a little different because it all started with an interview I did for another project. I'm always doing all projects.
There's so many
just
projects.
projecting all the time. And in that, I talked to Lynn Meinders about how we can all be mindful of making good choices for our own mental health this holiday season.
So, full disclosure, I sat this one out, but I do get to be here to help introduce this great interview, and we'll both be back at the end with something awesome to share. So, without further ado, here's Sue's interview with Lynn Meinders.
Just like that.
Okay, just like that.
So we start with the easy questions. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Lynn.
Oh, tell me about myself. Well, my name is Lynn Meinders. I have been living in the Marshfield area for a long, long time. I moved there in 1989. I was not raised, I'm not a local, by birth or anything, but I have worked in a variety of different social work jobs through my career. I've been with Ascension's Employee Assistance Program for the past 7.5 years. Prior to that, I worked in hospice, home care, and palliative care. And prior to that, I worked in the Wood County system with people with varying disabilities and mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And I'm originally from Union Grove, Wisconsin, where a lot of my family still live. What else would you like to know? I've got a couple of adult kids. We have started, and a husband, and we have started to be in that world where we have to share holidays because of partners, because of the kids' partners. So that's interesting and challenging sometimes, and kind of appropriate for the conversation.
And that's a facet I didn't even think about. That I think that lends a whole other level of complexity.
It does. Yeah. It's something that in the counseling world, it's not uncommon as a counselor to hear people, when they're discussing the stress of holidays, to talk about, the juggle of how do you get to share time.
Right. And I suppose knowing you have to bring the same level of energy, for some people, there are people that are people pleasers like myself.
Right.
And would go into that saying, well, I can't be, this is my 4th place I've been today.
Oh, right.
But
yeah.
I have to bring 100%.
I haven't, I'm not full yet. Right.
Interesting. So it sounds like you have an awful lot of experience with people who are healing from trauma, who are healing from grief, who are going, sort of weathering every storm.
True. Yeah.
And sort of that perfect storm that COVID and everything, all of the other conditions of the world have created.
Yeah, I think that when you point out grief in particular is something, that's very, very personal. It's not, it's universal in that we all experience that in our lives, but we don't experience it in exactly the same way, for sure. But I think that this pandemic has brought on some familiar levels of grief that we all can relate to. All of us have been impacted by it in some way or other. And a lot of people are talking about, and this is certainly something that I have felt, how strange it feels as things have opened up more in some of the ways we can connect in person. It feels different in some ways. It's hard to resume what we used to do. There's like an awareness of this feels strange to us. And, a lot of people have had that sensation of like, well, what year is it? What did we do? How did we used to do it? Are we able to do that? Or even just like, what happened to that year? That 2020 year disappeared. it didn't disappear. We all lived it,
Right.
but it doesn't get racked into as we track
Right.
how we've spent our time. It's like, what did we do that year? Oh, that's right. We didn't do that. That was COVID year.
Right. Yeah. We didn't do anything. It's interesting you point that out, because it feels like we spent so much of 2020 on hold.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was, well, in a short amount of time, we'll be able to do that. And in a short, in
Right.
for 2 weeks, and then a month, and then,
Right.
and then it
Right.
became that common language of, well, when things start to open up, we can do that.
Right.
We can.
Yeah. The constant readjustment of, I think it's going to be this much longer. I think it's going to be maybe that much longer. And even, even now, there's the not as much about like, are we safe to be together, but, people are still concerned. And in some families, people aren't concerned at all. And then there are a few members of the family that do feel concerned, and that creates anxiety and stress and sometimes conflict. And, but getting back to the grief part of it, when there has been, when there has been a loss that people are actively grieving, what happens around the holidays is, for a lot of people, it feels like I don't have the energy to put out my normal amount of effort, and I don't know where I will get that energy from. And so I think it's really important to be able to understand that you can have permission to not this year, like the cookies don't have to get baked in the usual way. You don't have to host. I have a good friend who taught me years ago, when her dad died, that she understood that she didn't have to do Christmas cards now. Mm-hmm. She's never gone back to them. It's been 20 years. She just gave herself an out that year. And she appreciated the lack of, pressure. Has it impacted how she's kept in contact with people? No, not really, because there are other means for, making sure you can stay in the loop of your connections.
Right.
But certainly that is one permission that comes more easily with grief, I think, because your energy is so finite when you're grieving. Mm-hmm. I don't know that everybody automatically knows that they can change it. I think it's important to be reminded that they can change it, though. Right.
Well, and I'm really glad that you latched onto that and talked more about it, because that absolutely is the sort of the origins, the genesis of what got me to writing this particular blog post. So I mentioned to you in the email I sent you that we're doing a lending campaign. It's about making choices over the holidays, and there's sort of this tenuous connection to taking care of your mental health. And but that happened in parallel to a conversation I had with a friend of mine, because I lost my mother this year.
Yeah.
And he said the same thing. He said, consider the fact that maybe you don't have to do that. Maybe you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
And so that, that really did put me on this path of thinking like, I have, again, grief is very specific. Mm-hmm. It is, everyone's dealing with it in the way that they're dealing with it. And I'm not even the only person in my family dealing with it.
Right.
But people are, I think right now, people are grieving a whole lot of things, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, a place to live, there are all kinds of grief. And probably I would guess that considering what we've all gone through in the last couple of years, there are probably people grieving that are working through grief that they don't understand, because it's, in essence,
they're not calling it that, or it hasn't been identified as that, but it is causing the discombobulation that they're feeling, or it's contributing to it in some way.
Right.
I think that is true. And I think that's probably quite true, that there's a bit of, confusion that people experience around, why am I feeling like this? Why does it why does it seem like I can't get it together? You know, I've heard a lot of that from folks talking about like their memory being affected, or like, I'm not tracking time in the same way. I don't feel like I'm as on top of things as I normally would be. What's wrong with me? When really what's wrong with me is not just with me, right? It's we're going through something that we've never gone through before. Feels very threatening in some cases. And because, you know, there's a virus, you know, I mean, if you just think about COVID, like that feels scary in some ways, and yet we have to function. In addition to that, normal life went on. People still had other illnesses. People still had other work problems. People still had new relationships or challenging relationships. People still went to school. We had all these changes and we had to keep going forward. Bills had to continue to be paid. You know, the weather created challenges for us.
Right.
But during this last year and a half, we've had lots of things get canceled. We've had lots of things get postponed. We had lots of demands that were still there, like they've always been. And we haven't been as, when we haven't known when is it going to go back to normal? Is it?
Right.
There's been a lot of uncertainty that we've been handling. And so I think that not everybody, I think I agree with you, not everybody has been like able to be self-aware and tuned in to what is going on here. When it's a specific grief, a specific loss, well, I lost my mom, and so therefore this makes sense to me. There is something kind of enlightening about that, because at least we can call it what it is. We know, oh yeah, that's right. That's how people do feel when they go through something like that. But it isn't necessarily on everybody's radar as to what is going on.
Right.
For them.
I would think that there are probably people experiencing sort of a loss of self, a loss of, they thought that they knew who they were, how they reacted to things, what they would do, in an emergency, and all of that has been challenged. I mean, especially, there were a whole lot of us adults, and very adulty adults, who really thought like, whatever happens, I've been through all of this other stuff. So whatever is coming down the pike, I'll just deal with it. Right. And then we experience something exactly to your point that none of us could, historically, we have a historical record. Right. But all of us, were too young to know what that historical record would be. We were too young to know how we would practically deal with it. We didn't have the experience. Right.
And it's been pretty destabilizing in ways that we couldn't have prepared for. And we certainly, didn't think about ahead of time. Like, there were some people who knew this could happen, but there was other people that are at certain scientific levels of preparedness that the rest of us are supposed to listen to. We're not thinking along those lines like they are. We're not all risk managers and people who project into the future like that. So I think it caught all of us in some way or other by surprise, whether it's at a real planning level, or just I can't go into that place now without wearing a mask, or without showing a proof of something now, or I can't I can't take my trip, or whatever those things are day to day. So there has been a requirement of a lot of adjustment, and that takes a toll. And then the calendar keeps ticking, right? Like, well, guess what? It's November. We're all talking about Thanksgiving right now. We're all starting to think about the fact that there are holidays coming, and the calendar is going to keep moving forward, whether we're ready, prepared, have the plan, or don't.
Right. So let's move ahead and talk about traditions.
Yeah.
Are there benefits, knowing what this sort of shared trauma everyone has experienced is, are there benefits to maintaining some of those traditions? And if so, what are they?
I think there are benefits because there's comfort in it. There's comfort in nostalgia. There's comfort in routine. There's comfort in, there's like a sense of connection and cohesion, and tradition matters. That's why why we do these things. But again, I wonder about this because every family has different, very certain things that are just kind of sacred, special, and certain things that seem like, well, why do we really do this? Like how important is the meal, for example? Does the meal have to be these items, or could the meal be a pan of lasagna? Does it have to be turkey? What is this about? Like, what is it for our individual family? I think it's about for if you get underneath the meaning of it, what is it that's important here, right? Is it, in my family, one of the things that happens that we have come to really enjoy as a tradition is, once the meal is done and the table's cleared, we're playing games. And that's where the fun is. And that's where the laughter comes. And that's where the connection is. And that's what people are looking forward to mostly. They're doing it with a full belly, which feels good. But the tradition, really, the meaningful part is really more about, for most of the people, about let's clear the table and get the game started, right? And whatever it might be that year that we're going to play. It's usually a few different things. Now, some families are about sports. Some families are about, they do like to all be together on creating a meal and bringing wine, or, sharing in the consumption of those delicious things. Some families have tradition about Black Friday. Like this year, maybe people are going to go back out to the stores and do their kind of ritual shopping where they get to do that together and they find the deals. It's a big deal for some people, so I think there's power in that for people. But I always think about, like, can you feel the tangible reward? Like, can you tell that feels good? Because it might also feel stressful. But does it convert into a sense of satisfaction, or a sense of cohesion, or a sense of well-being? How do you measure that? Does it make you happy?
Right. Is it worth it? Is the stress, if there's stress at the end of it, is it worth it to you? Right.
That's something that, I don't know that everybody checks in with themselves about that, but I think that's a measure that I would recommend in terms of, if someone is trying to figure out, this year, do I make that thing happen, or do I participate in it? I would suggest that we check in with, does it feel like it's worth it? Does it give us what we need? Now, not everybody, holidays are stressful for a lot of people, like stressful in the way that it feels like I would rather avoid doing that, because it just makes me feel uneasy in so many ways. And in that case, for some people, the best thing to do is to keep it pretty low key and not do the things that feel like shoulds.
Right.
Because they're not very rewarding.
Right. So that's a beautiful transition. You're really good at this. What are other red flags that people that are maybe feeling under stress, healing from trauma, still grieving, should be watching for, that would tell them, I need to check in with myself and I may need to change course here and do something different, or do nothing at all?
Right. To just opt out. Yeah.
Just have a no bones day. Do you know about no bones
Right.
day?
I know about, yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that. Yeah. You get permission to have a no bones day. Yeah. That poor dog. I do like that though. I mean, it's an assessment. It's a way of
Right.
checking in, and it's a way of saying, hey, you know what? There's time. You'll figure it out. You don't have to do everything today. I like that. Yeah, well, some of the red flags that come to mind for me, here's one that's personal. I noticed, I just had this happen to me recently where and I figured out that, oh, this is a signal that I'm not operating in the right place, like from a mental health standpoint. When I'm trying to reconfigure the plan so that everybody's needs get met, and I'm trying to squeeze in, well, maybe we could run here and maybe we could do this, maybe I could attach that to the day. That's a red flag that it's getting too complicated.
Mhm.
Therefore, it's getting more stressful. It's getting more hectic. And I'm in the middle of that, trying to be in the old days when the people used to have to connect phone calls by plugging in the wire or the little connector thing. I feel like that person, like, hold please. Okay, here, is everyone tuned in? Being in that role is pretty hard to sustain, and it's exhausting, and often it's unappreciated. Often you're the hub and you're trying to make everything happen for everybody. It reduces it tells everyone else that I'll handle it, right? Well, you mentioned people pleasing. I mean, that's people pleasing, and it's not healthy. It's bad for us. And so when how do you notice when you're doing that? You notice because you're rearranging all the time. That's a red flag. That's telling you that you're using up all your resources before the event even happens.
Mhm.
And so if you look at that, you think, you know what, all these people are adults, probably. If we say, here's what the event is, can you come? I hope you can come. They get to make up their own mind.
Mhm.
If it creates a problem in their life, maybe then they have to figure out a few of their complicators, and then they either can come or they can't come. Nowadays, if you can't come, there are other ways to reach in. We can have a video call during the party, and maybe some people get on the screen for a little while. Maybe we have a phone call and we put you on speaker, or we pass you around so you can chat with everybody, if you're not able to be there.
Mhm.
There are options. It's not always just either you're there or you miss everything. You don't get to be
Right.
part of anything.
Right.
Other red flags that come to my mind would be mood related. Like if I find that I'm more irritable, I'm more taking it out on someone because it's a lot to handle. I'm resorting to drinking more as I lead up to the thing, or I'm looking for eating more. We do that a lot to kind of soothe our distress. Overeating, over drinking, numbing, like I'm not very functional, not getting a whole lot. I'm procrastinating. I know I have all those gifts to wrap, and I don't know when I'm going to do it because I'm doing too many things.
Mhm.
I think dread could be a red flag, like particularly if there are conflicted relationships, or there's someone coming that I don't want to see. I personally don't want to have this kind of conversation turn into something about the big divide that's going on, but that's real in families. The societal and political stuff that comes in, and it makes it very, very hard for people. And in some families, people can navigate that and say, hey, we're just going to agree that we don't talk about that today. We're going to have fun today.
Mhm.
Some people don't follow those rules. And people can feel a lot of dread about approaching an event with the folks in their
Right.
family that they struggle with. Do you have any red flags in mind? I'm trying to think of others that are off that list.
Now, I think you have covered, I think you've covered everything that really comes to mind. There's sort of this gray, you mentioned dread. And, I associate some of this with just that feeling of anxiety. If you are, and obviously it doesn't need to be said, but we will say it, that there are people who suffer from clinical anxiety.
Mhm.
And this is it's a serious issue, and it is something that they have no matter what is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
I suspect that there probably are people who have led pretty mellow lives and are sort of starting to deal with that feeling of anxiety, real serious sort of heart-stopping anxiety, maybe for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling of, I don't know if I can do this. I feel like I have to do it. That sort of fight, your own mental fight of,
Yeah.
I don't know how I'll
the
survive
sense
this.
of like what's expected of me versus what do I really want to do, and what are people going to think if I don't do
Right.
what everyone seems to want or we think everyone wants. Like a lot of times that's a mental game that's going on, and it feels, another thing that complicates it is comparison, right?
Mhm.
Like in situations where it rotates. So, my sister-in-law hosted, and this is how it was. And I'm going to host because it's my turn. And I don't go to the lengths that she goes, or my house isn't as whatever,
Palatial.
comparing. Yeah.
Yes.
Comparing is really bad for us, but we do it all the time, right? Because when we compare, we're never going to be good enough.
Mhm.
There's somebody smart said comparison is the thief of joy, and that's true, right? If I'm in the comparison mode, then I'm always looking at what everybody else has that I don't have. And so how can I be happy? How can I feel good if I'm looking out there and saying, well, they do it nicer, they have better dishes, they have more room in their house, they cook better. And therefore, what stems from that then is everyone's going to be judging.
Right.
So I'm already judging myself in anticipation. And that's not really the spirit.
Saves so much time though, Lynn. If I start judging myself immediately, we're just so
But
efficient.
imagine how worn out you are when you're the one who's going to host, or
Right.
you're the one who's going to try to enter into the spirit of what's the point of all this?
Mhm.
I don't think the point of it is for us to be worn out and stressed out and not enjoying the company of the people we love, right? Or the people
Right.
we identify as our close inner circle. Like those people, we are supposed to enjoy our time with them.
Right. So let's tie a bow on it. Let's talk about that, about how we can maybe set the benefits of setting aside some of that stress, anxiety, the tasks, the telephone operator
Right.
habits,
Right.
and what maybe we can do instead to actually have a wonderful time with the people we care about.
Well, I think I think that there has to be some communication and some dialogue about it, right? Like depending on what the circumstances are. Like in some families, a lot of families, it's like we traditionally go to mom's house, right? And now if mom's not here anymore, what are we doing? We have to talk about what that's going to be. if mom's still here, but mom, we want to not put it all on mom. Well, let's talk about, could we do this differently? In our family, if it's, hey, what we really want to do is play games all day, and it's the only time we all get together, and that's what our real focus is, then can we simplify the meal or the food part of it? Can we all bring something and just have crock pots going? And we want food, like everyone wants food at holidays, right? That's a big part of it. But it doesn't have to be that one person's in charge of making all of it. It doesn't have to be that it has to be a big sit down dinner with the china and the crystal, right? It could be that, but it doesn't have to be that. And maybe there are some alternatives that can be decided upon to simplify it and allow the stuff that's really rewarding to come to the forefront. Like traditionally, I mean, I come from traditional Wisconsin, where the women are doing all the work and the men are watching football and they're not helping with the dishes and they're not making the food and they're not, I mean, that's, no one ever brought it up. But then like my generation grew up and said, well, that isn't how I want to spend the holiday, right? Now, not every home is like that. But if there's a way to kind of turn it so that everyone gets to enjoy and not have it be out of balance, I think that could work, but it has to be talked about beforehand, right? So there probably does need to be an element of communication. What's the plan? What's the date? What's the time?
Right.
What are we having for food? How do we really want to spend the time? Are we rotating this? Is everyone contributing? There needs to be communication about, are you coming or not? Like I have a friend who told me that recently she sent out a message to a group text and about, hey, we're hosting, we're inviting you. And several members of part of the family just never answered. And it's been a couple of weeks. She has no idea, and that's irritating to her because she's the one who's hosting. Like, I kind of want to know if you get an invitation, you should answer it, right? Yeah. You should at least reply with, oh, thank you, I'm thinking about it, or we'll let you know if you if you can't answer affirmatively or not. So simplifying, talking about it. Sometimes it helps to kind of poll everybody, send out a poll, we have this option or this option. What do you prefer? Like, we can use technology to our advantage in that way too, to like, we want to have a good time together. We want to like really enhance the time we do have. What's the most meaningful thing for you? With large families, that might have to be some kind of communication like that. With smaller families, I think you can have actual conversation and get everybody to pitch in their ideas.
And is it maybe fair to say, if you have a family with long-standing traditions and you open up that communication and say, we're thinking we're going to take it easy on ourselves this year. Yeah. And maybe someone in that group says, no, I don't like that. I want, we're going to have the sausage, stuffing, and we're going to have the yams, and we're going to do the whole thing. Right. Is it fair to then say to that person, okay, so tell us what you're willing to do to make that happen?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If that person's, if there's somebody who's saying, no, it's super important to me that this be the way that it always was, and there isn't someone else who can do that or wants to do it, then yeah, absolutely. Well, what are you willing to do to make sure we can have that? Like that person, especially if we're all adults,
right?
That might be the opening to negotiate some things, because maybe the person who could do that part of it also is the person who does the pies, and also the person who does the the
Mhm.
sides. Well, then what can I let go of? I can do the sausage stuffing, but what are you going to take off my plate? I mean, I think that's reasonable. That's reasonable. That's the other thing, this is a good point. One of the things that I've noticed, and that happens in a lot of families, is when we go back home, even though we're adults and like really have been adults for a long time, it's really easy to slip back into our roles of what it was like as siblings, with our parents. Like it's really easy to just kind of turn back into those kids, even if we're doing some things like we're being helpful and we're being, thoughtful and supportive and kinder to one another. We're still, especially if we go back to the family home, if it's still the same house we grew up in, there's a subtle sort of reversion that happens. Not everybody's aware of it happening, but it happens. Some people turn a little more sullen. Some people are a little more, we all had roles growing up in our families, and we sort of still have those when we're with our siblings. And some of that's for good and some of it isn't.
Yeah, I suppose it's like slipping on those old shoes or those slippers,
Right.
and there's comfort in it, and you have,
Right.
especially, like you pointed out, if the family home is still there, so the smells are the same and everything feels the same, and it's
Yeah, well, and
it's a comfortable
a lot of that
default.
stuff is baked in, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't, and it's easier in that kind of setting and in that kind of company to sort of like, for that to just naturally kind of evolve again and come out.
Mhm.
And that's how we aren't always thinking it. It's just that it
Right.
comes out. And you do see that more often in families when there's been a stressful situation, like mom and dad aren't well, or someone has died. And there's a different kind of refiguring of, of stability within the family system. That's probably, you could analyze that for more than a half hour, I can tell you. But just to put a point on why do things get stressful? Like in that example of all of our family has gone through something. We are now facing the holidays and we want to adjust, and we're going to adjust what we do because not all the people are here anymore, or because someone isn't able to do all the workload to make it nice for everybody else. We're asking everyone to pitch in. There probably is going to be at least one person who says, I don't want anything to change. I like it better the way it was. That might be grief talking too, right? Because
Very good point.
We don't want things to change, and grief forces you to come to, not that you have to come to terms with it, but it forces you to notice that life doesn't get to be the way that it was. And when that person is gone, that challenge isn't easily resolved. It's hard, and we have to face it. Like, we used to do this, it used to feel this way.
Right.
The holidays always felt this way, and now it doesn't feel like that anymore. And I don't know how it's going to feel. Will I ever get that back? I don't know. It puts you into a state of some change and uncertainty that lasts a long time.
Right. So I don't want to keep you too much longer. Here's what we have learned.
Here are our takeaways.
Here are our takeaways. If a tradition feels worth it, even if there's some stress associated with it, if it feels like you are gaining from it, like you're building yourself up, then it is probably healthy.
Right.
Once you start to tip into, I'm getting nothing from it, it is causing me nothing but pain, then it is more healthy to consider shifting your plans, and to shift your plans, communication, just like in every other thing.
Right.
Communication is key.
Right. I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And some of that is very individualized. The idea of how do I tell if it's worth it, right?
Mhm.
This on a completely different subject. I have a real boundary typically between work and life, right? Like work is part of life, but I typically don't like to do my work when I'm not working.
Mhm.
If I find out that, oh my gosh, my schedule is just packed and I think I need to carve out a little time on the weekend to do some of my work, can that sometimes be okay? Sure, it can. If I decide it's worth it for me to give up 2 hours on my Saturday morning so that I can feel at peace and not feel that hanging over my head, and I'm willing and I'm thoughtful about it, yes, absolutely. That's a sense of like, yeah, I can measure that out and it feels worth it. If making 120 dozen cutout cookies is worth it to me because I get to have a creative outlet, because I get to have people come over and do it with me, because everybody is so happy when they get my cutouts, maybe it is worth it. But if I do that, nobody helps me. I feel really, mad because I'm doing it all by myself and nobody seems to ever give me a compliment or appreciate them. Maybe
Right.
that's not fun. Maybe that's
Right.
not how I want to spend a whole day.
Yeah. So that worth itness is really individual.
That seems like it is a really personal
Yeah.
thing to be aware of, because not everyone's going to measure it the same way.
Right.
For some people, that is worth it because that's what I always did with mom, and I loved my time with her, and it makes me feel close to her. Or it's something I'm teaching my grandkids how to do with me, or it's, there's like
Mhm.
really personal meaning to it. Other people really get a creative flair out of it, and that's the win for them.
Right. So go for the win.
Find the win somewhere.
Find the win somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
That is a great summary. I love that a lot. Lynn,
Okay,
I
good.
appreciate you so much taking time with me today.
Oh, it was nice to be asked. Thank you very much.
This was
I-
absolutely delightful.
Good. Well, I'm happy to help. I'm glad we got connected.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I enjoyed talking to Lynn very, very much. And speaking of awesome things,
It is time to close out the show with our Something Awesome segment. Even though our episode was a little different this time, we got to land the plane and bring it home with our Something Awesome segment, which is where we share some recommendations for things or just things that happen to us that are great, your favorite books, podcasts, experiences, all that good stuff. And I'm going to kick it off with it is almost Thanksgiving, so I'm in the Thanksgiving mood for sure. And Sue, when you think of Thanksgiving, what's the first thing you think of?
pumpkin pie.
Okay. Not exactly the answer I was looking for,
okay.
but at least partially right.
Okay.
Because there was a right and wrong answer to my question. The food, right? The meal.
food.
That's
Okay.
what I think of.
I'm laser focused.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate, and I know that I'm fortunate to think of the food first and to have the means and the ability to prepare that meal for my family or with my family, or travel to my parents' place and participate in a big old meal with my family, right? So so grateful for that. And I know that that opportunity is not there for everyone.
Right.
And what I also know is that there are a lot of amazing human beings that do a thing that I don't know if I could do, which is give up their Thanksgiving
Ooh.
to provide meals for people that don't have that opportunity to travel to grandma and grandpa's house or whatever, right? So just a huge shout out to anyone out there, especially anyone listening, but listeners and people you may know, and just good vibes through the universe to people that that do this thing, which I think is like a superpower of choosing to not do your own Thanksgiving meal, or maybe even just delaying it so that on Thanksgiving Day you can go to the food shelter or the church or wherever it is that you're providing meals to people that maybe don't have that opportunity. What we're going to share in the recap of the podcast is a link, a really cool article from MSN that just shared a story of this guy that's been doing it for 44 years. So like many volunteer opportunities, especially one that, kind of speaks to the heart, you do it once and it almost becomes addicting, right? And so I can just imagine this guy volunteering for the first time to serve Thanksgiving meals 44 years ago, and was just like, dang, that felt good, and just did it for that long, right? So I mean, props to anybody who gives up a Thanksgiving to serve Thanksgiving meals, but special shout out to people that have been doing it for a while, and especially this guy who has done it for 44 years. So I should have had I don't have his name in the notes, so you'll have to read the article. I should give him, I should at least be able to say his name on the podcast, but check out the article. It's a feel good one for sure. And lots of thankful and good Thanksgiving vibes going out to everyone. So,
Nice.
Yeah.
So, somewhat pertinent as a person who is responsible for the whole Thanksgiving meal this year.
Yeah.
And in a shout out, a reference back to a part of the interview, which you actually haven't heard when we're recording this yet, thinking about how getting some of that stuff done can be a little taxing on your mental health. My Something Awesome is a podcast I've listened to for a long time. It was maybe one of the first ones when I really started commuting a long way.
Yeah.
That I started listening to. It's called the Mental Illness Happy Hour, and you can find it at mentalpod.com. The host is Paul Gilmartin, and he interviews comedians and actors and doctors and just all different kinds of really interesting people about things like childhood trauma and mental illness and their experiences. And it is really affirming, and he's delightful to listen to. So if you have any interest in finding ways to sort of find community around your own mental health or learn more about other people's mental health, Mental Illness Happy Hour is a great place to go.
Awesome share.
Yes.
I will be checking it out.
You should.
Awesome.
It's very good. And also not safe for work.
Yeah.
So another NSFW podcast I am happy to share. And we will include the link. So we'll include the link to that. We'll include the link to the article that Ben mentioned. Those will be right with our podcast. So you can always go to our blog at exclamationqso.com/blog. See all of our past episodes and check out any other resources there. And this is your friendly reminder that you can find us on your favorite podcast app. If you are visiting us right now off of our blog, you can subscribe to our podcast. A lot of awesome places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Name your poison. And you can hear all of our episodes.
Awesome. Thanks, Sue. And thank you again to Lynn for taking the time to talk. And thank you, friends, for tuning in as always. This is Sue and Ben, your self-proclaimed professors of awesomeology, reminding you that life's awesome if you make it awesome. We'll see you next time.